Commander Victor Kane snatched the spotter's report from the soldier's hand, looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then crumpled it and threw it on the ground right in front of Emily Carter's boots. "A bullseye," he said loud enough for every man on that range to hear. At 1,500 meters from her, he pointed directly at Emily's face. "She cleans rifles. She doesn't shoot them." The laughter that followed was immediate and brutal. That single moment, that one public humiliation, was about to cost Commander Kane everything he had spent 20 years building. If you're new here, please subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss a single moment of this story. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. There is a particular kind of invisibility that the military creates without ever meaning to. It is not written in any regulation. It is not taught in any leadership course. It lives inside the assumptions people carry the moment they look at someone and decide in the space of 3 seconds exactly who that person is and exactly what that person is worth. Emily Carter had been living inside that invisibility for 6 weeks. She arrived at Fort Raven Tactical Training Center on a Tuesday morning in early October, driving a government-issued pickup truck that had seen better years, carrying 2 duffel bags and a folder of administrative paperwork that assigned her to equipment management and logistical support for the base's long-range precision shooting program. The soldier at the front gate looked at her credentials, looked at her face, looked at her support specialist uniform, and then pointed her toward Building C without saying a single word. That was the beginning. Building C was where the forgotten things lived. Spare parts for scopes that nobody had ordered. Crates of cleaning supplies stacked to the ceiling. Rifle cases that needed new latches. Targeting computers that needed recalibration. Forms that needed filing. Inventories that nobody had audited in 2 years. Emily walked through the door, set her bags down, looked at the organized chaos around her, and quietly went to work. Nobody welcomed her. Nobody introduced themselves. Nobody asked where she came from, or what her background was, or why she had been assigned to Fort Raven specifically of all the bases in the country. That was fine with Emily. That was in fact exactly what she needed. The precision shooting program at Fort Raven was considered the best in the country, and Commander Victor Kane was the reason why. He had built it from the ground up over 15 years. He had personally trained 43 elite shooters who had gone on to serve in special operations units across every branch of the military. He had broken 12 records. He had written 3 training manuals that were now standard reading at facilities across the country. He was by every measurable standard exceptional at what he did. He was also the kind of man who entered a room and immediately understood without needing to ask who mattered and who did not. Emily Carter, wearing a support uniform and carrying a toolbox full of calibration equipment, did not matter. Kane passed her in the hallway on her 3rd day at Fort Raven. He glanced at her the way you glance at a piece of furniture, acknowledging its presence without actually seeing it, and then he kept walking without breaking stride. Emily watched him go. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She had seen men like Kane before. She understood them better than they would ever be comfortable knowing. The training range at Fort Raven was an impressive facility. It stretched across nearly 3 miles of carefully managed terrain with shooting positions at different elevations, target systems that could be controlled remotely, and environmental monitoring equipment that tracked wind speed, humidity, and atmospheric pressure in real time. Every morning, the trainees arrived at 6. They were a select group, 12 soldiers who had been hand-chosen from across the military based on aptitude scores, physical performance, and psychological evaluations. They were, in the language of the program, the best candidates available. They trained hard. They were serious, focused, and competitive in the way that high-performing people in high-stakes environments tend to be competitive, which is to say constantly and sometimes without mercy. Emily observed all of it from the edges. She moved through the facility the way smoke moves through a building, present everywhere, noticed by almost nobody. She repaired a scope mount that had cracked during a high-pressure test. She recalibrated a targeting computer that had been giving slightly incorrect atmospheric readings so slightly off that most people would never have noticed the discrepancy, but that Emily identified within 40 minutes of sitting down with the equipment. She organized the ammunition storage system in a way that reduced retrieval time during training exercises by nearly 3 minutes per session. None of these contributions were acknowledged. None of them were expected to be. And Emily Carter, who had once stood in front of a congressional oversight committee and received a classified commendation that fewer than 50 people in the entire country knew existed, said nothing and continued working. What she was doing, what she was really doing during those 6 weeks was listening. She listened to how Kane talked to the trainees. She listened to how the trainees talked to each other. She listened to the culture that existed inside Fort Raven's shooting program, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat, not just for what it sounds like, but for what the sound tells you about everything underneath. What she heard concerned her. It was not obvious. It was not the kind of thing that would show up in an inspection report or a performance review. The training was excellent. The technical instruction was rigorous and accurate and genuinely world-class. The problem lived in the spaces between the instruction. It lived in the way Kane dismissed questions from trainees who didn't frame their uncertainty the right way. It lived in the hierarchy of respect that had calcified inside the program, where your value was determined not by what you actually knew or what you had actually done, but by your rank, your record, and the way you carried yourself in front of Commander Kane specifically. It lived in the laughter. The first time Emily heard someone laugh at her, she was recalibrating a scope in the equipment bay adjacent to the main range. Two trainees walked past the open door. One of them glanced inside, saw Emily bent over the workbench, and said something to the other in a low voice that Emily couldn't quite hear. The laughter was not low. She kept working. The second time, it was a comment from a senior instructor named Briggs, a thick-necked man with 17 years of service and a fondness for making observations that were technically not insults but functioned exactly like them. "Support staff in the equipment bay," he announced one morning during a briefing, gesturing toward the building where Emily worked. "At least someone's making sure the rifles are clean. Lord knows we need the help." More laughter. Emily was not in the room when this happened. She heard about it afterward from a young trainee named Specialist Marcus Webb, who had the decency to look uncomfortable when he relayed the comment to a colleague within Emily's earshot. Marcus was 24 years old from Savannah, Georgia, and had the particular quality of someone who knew that something was wrong, even when everyone around him was telling him it was normal. Emily had noticed him during her first week. He asked more questions than the other trainees. He listened differently, not just waiting for the instructor to finish so he could demonstrate that he'd understood, but actually processing, actually thinking, actually uncertain in a way that most people in high-performance environments are trained to hide. She liked him immediately. She didn't tell him that. She said nothing to Marcus Webb for the first 3 weeks of her time at Fort Raven because she was watching and because she had learned a very long time ago that you understand people far better when they don't know they're being understood. The equipment bay became her sanctuary in those weeks. It was a large industrial space that smelled of gun oil and dry air, and the particular metallic sharpness of precision instruments. Emily had cleaned it when she arrived. The previous occupant had left it in a state that suggested either spectacular indifference or a genuine inability to see disorder. And now it was organized the way she organized everything, with a logic that was invisible until you needed something specific and then became immediately obvious. She had set up a small workbench in the far corner where she did the delicate calibration work. Next to it, a field notebook, handwritten, no labels, the kind that looked like random observations to anyone who glanced at it and contained, to anyone who understood it, a precise record of every anomaly she had identified in the program's equipment. Over 6 weeks, she was there on the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Thursday. The trainees had finished their scheduled sessions for the day. The main range was officially closed. The instructors had gone to the debrief room for their end-of-day review, which Kane ran with the same precision he applied to everything: tight structured, no wasted time. Emily was working late. She had been recalibrating a wind sensor that had been giving inconsistent readings, and the process was taking longer than expected because the sensor's internal mechanism had a microscopic defect that she had only identified after 2 hours of careful examination. She was not paying attention to the range. She was paying attention to the sensor. And then she heard it, the sound of a gate, specifically the sound of a restricted shooting lane, gate opening, a gate that was supposed to be locked, that was always locked after hours, that had apparently suffered a mechanical failure in its electronic lock sometime during the previous 24 hours. Emily set down the sensor. She walked to the equipment bay door and looked toward the range. The restricted lane, lane 7. The longest lane on the facility, extending 3 miles into the Arizona terrain, was open, not just unlocked. The gate itself was swinging gently in the evening wind, and beyond it, exactly as she had seen it hundreds of times through the equipment bay window. The range stretched out into the fading afternoon light. At the far end of Lane 7, barely visible in the dimming light, stood a target. Emily looked at the target for a long moment. She looked back into the equipment bay. In the corner beneath a rack of cleaning supplies that nobody had touched in weeks, sat a precision rifle that she had repaired 3 days earlier, a .338 Lapua Magnum configuration that one of the instructors had returned with a damaged firing mechanism and a note that said, "Simply needs fixing." She had fixed it, she had tested the mechanism, she had recalibrated the scope, she had set it aside for return the following morning. It was ready. Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment. She was not supposed to use that rifle. She was not supposed to use that lane. She was support staff. She cleaned equipment and organized supplies and filed paperwork. That was what everyone at Fort Raven had decided about her. She walked to the corner. She lifted the rifle. She checked the mechanism with the automatic efficiency of someone who has performed that specific sequence of actions so many times that it no longer requires conscious thought. She checked the scope. She reached into the calibration kit on the workbench and removed a single round. One round. She walked out of the equipment bay and into the restricted lane. The wind was coming from the northwest at approximately 14 miles per hour, with a slight clockwise rotation that she could feel on the back of her left hand. The temperature had dropped 4 degrees since midday. The light was angling low and golden from the west, which would create a minimal but calculable distortion effect at extreme distances. She stood at the shooting position at the near end of Lane 7 and looked at the target, 1,547 meters. Almost a mile. Emily Carter lowered herself to the shooting position. She adjusted the scope. She breathed. She felt the wind. She felt the trigger. She felt the geometry of the shot. The way a musician feels the geometry of a difficult passage, not as a calculation, but as something lived and understood and inhabited. She exhaled. She fired. The sound of the shot echoed across the range and bounced back from the distant terrain in a way that made it sound for just a moment like thunder. Then silence. Emily stood up. She looked at the target. The target had turned green, a perfect bullseye at 1,547 meters. Without a spotter, without a team, without advanced ranging equipment, without anything except a recalibrated scope, one round in hands, that remembered what it felt like to do something extraordinary. She stood there for a moment alone on the range in the fading Arizona afternoon and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not pride, not satisfaction. Recognition of herself. Then she walked back into the equipment bay, returned the rifle to its position in the corner, and picked up the wind sensor. She still had work to finish. She was back at her workbench when the sound reached her, voices moving fast, coming from the direction of the range monitoring station, where an automatic camera system had captured the shot and flagged it as an anomaly requiring human review. Private First Class Danny Reyes was the first person to see the camera footage. He was 19 years old, from El Paso, and had been assigned range monitoring duty specifically because it was the least exciting duty on the base, and he had been late to formation twice in the previous month. He stared at the footage for about 30 seconds. Then he picked up the base phone and called the debrief room. "Sir," he said when Instructor Briggs answered, "you need to come to the monitoring station. Right now, I'm not sure how to explain what I'm looking at. Reyes, if this is about the gate malfunction." "Sir, it's about who walked through the gate." There was a pause. "Who walked through the gate?" Briggs said. Another pause from Reyes. "The equipment lady, sir." The debrief room went quiet. Commander Kane was on his feet before Reyes finished the sentence. "He arrived at the monitoring station in 4 minutes. He looked at the footage. He looked at the target confirmation report that the automatic system had already generated green confirmation, bullseye classification, distance measured at exactly 1,547 meters. He looked at the footage again. He looked at Briggs. "Get her," he said. The tone in Kane's voice was not the tone of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary and wanted to understand it. It was the tone of someone who had just been confronted with something that contradicted everything he had decided was true and was deeply, viscerally unhappy about it. Briggs found Emily in the equipment bay. She was still at her workbench. She did not look up when Briggs appeared in the doorway. "Commander Kane wants to see you," Briggs said. "At the range, now." Emily set down the sensor. She stood. She picked up her toolbox. "Leave the toolbox," Briggs said. She left it. The walk to the range took 3 minutes. Emily walked behind Briggs. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the main range entrance, Kane was already there, along with 6 of the 12 trainees who had apparently heard something unusual was happening and followed their curiosity to find out what. Marcus Webb was among them. He was standing slightly apart from the others, and when Emily appeared, he watched her with the particular attention of someone who has just realized that a situation is more complicated than it appeared. Kane had the spotter's report in his hand, the printout from the automatic monitoring system confirming the shot. He held it up when Emily approached. "Did you fire this shot?" he said. His voice was controlled. That was the most dangerous kind of anger, the kind that has been organized and directed, that knows exactly what it wants to accomplish. "Yes, sir," Emily said. Kane looked at her. He looked at the report. He looked at the trainees standing behind him, and in that moment, Emily understood what he was doing. He was performing. He was not trying to understand what had happened. He was managing it. He was deciding in real time how to transform something that threatened his authority into something that reinforced it. He crumpled the report. He threw it on the ground in front of Emily's boots. "A bullseye," he said, "at 1,500 meters. From her." He pointed at her face. The gesture was deliberate. It was meant to reduce her to a category support staff equipment handler, someone who did not belong in this conversation. "She cleans rifles. She doesn't shoot them." The laughter came immediately. Not from all of them. Marcus Webb was not laughing, and 2 of the other trainees looked uncertain, but from enough of them to fill the space with exactly the sound Kane wanted. Emily looked at Commander Kane. She did not look at the report on the ground. She did not look at the laughing trainees. She did not look at Briggs, who had crossed his arms and was watching with the expression of someone who has already decided how this ends. She looked at Kane, and something in the quality of that look, something quiet and patient and entirely without fear, made the laughter stop slightly faster than Kane had intended. "The shot is documented," Emily said. Her voice was even. "The system confirmed it." "The system can malfunction," Kane said. "Equipment fails. You know that better than anyone, don't you? You fix failing equipment for a living." "I do," Emily said. "I also know the difference between a system malfunction and a confirmed reading. The targeting computer cross-referenced with the downrange sensor, both confirmed." A very small silence. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected her to become defensive. He had expected her to apologize or explain or retreat into the comfortable deference that support staff were supposed to display in front of commanding officers. The fact that she was doing none of those things was to Kane a provocation. "I don't care what the computer says," Kane said. "I care about what's real. And what's real is that a support specialist should not be on that range. You had no authorization. You used restricted equipment. You accessed a restricted lane. Any one of those things alone is a serious violation." "Yes, sir," Emily said. "You're right." Another silence. Kane had expected argument. The agreement threw him slightly off balance, but only slightly, because he was very good at what he did. And what he did included managing unexpected situations. "Then we're done here," he said. "We could be," Emily said, "or you could ask me to do it again." The temperature on the range dropped about 10 degrees. Briggs uncrossed his arms. Marcus Webb took one small step forward. Kane stared at Emily Carter with the expression of a man who is trying to decide whether he has just been challenged or insulted, and has arrived at the conclusion that the answer is both. "Excuse me," he said. "If you believe the shot was luck," Emily said, "or a system malfunction, or anything other than what it actually was, then ask me to do it again. Set up the conditions yourself. You control the equipment, the target, the documentation. Remove every variable you're uncertain about." She paused. "And then watch." The range was completely silent. Kane looked at Emily Carter for a long moment. He was calculating. She could see it happening, the careful, precise calculation of a man who was very good at understanding situations and determining the most strategically advantageous response. He had 2 options. He could dismiss her and walk away, which would leave the doubt festering because the shot was documented, and documentation had a way of becoming permanent. Or he could accept the challenge, believing with complete confidence that he was about to expose her as a fraud and resolve the situation permanently in his favor. Kane had not built the best shooting program in the country by avoiding difficult decisions. Fine, he said. He turned to Briggs. Set up the verification protocol. Full documentation. I want every variable controlled. He turned back to Emily. Tomorrow, 0600, you'll have one chance. He turned and walked away. The trainees began to disperse. Most of them were talking quiet, urgent conversations that Emily could not hear, but could read from the body language and the gestures. The impossible shot, the equipment lady, the challenge. Marcus Webb did not disperse. He waited until everyone else had moved away, and then he walked toward Emily. He stopped about 6 feet from her, and he looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has just had a very comfortable assumption destroyed and is trying to figure out what to build in its place. "Ma'am," he said, "I have to ask you something." "Go ahead," Emily said. "That shot," he said, "at 1547 meters, without a spotter." He paused. That's not something you pick up. That kind of accuracy at that distance takes years. He stopped, started again. "Who are you?" Emily looked at Marcus Webb for a moment. She looked at the honesty in his face, the genuine, uncalculated curiosity of someone who was asking because he actually wanted to know, not because he was managing a situation or protecting a position. "I'm the equipment manager," she said. Marcus stared at her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "with respect, that is not an answer." Emily almost smiled. Almost. "No," she agreed. "I suppose it isn't." She looked out at the range at Lane 7 still open in the fading light, the distant target barely visible. "Get some rest, specialist. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She walked back toward the equipment bay. Marcus Webb stood where he was and watched her go, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone standing at the edge of something large and realizing for the first time how large it actually is. Inside the equipment bay, Emily picked up her toolbox. She sat back down at the workbench. She picked up the wind sensor. She had 3 more hours of calibration work to do. She did it. She was still there when the base went quiet and the lights in the main building flickered to their nighttime setting. She was still there when the wind outside shifted from northwest to north and the temperature dropped another 8 degrees. She worked with the particular concentration of someone who does not have the luxury of distraction. Every measurement precise, every adjustment deliberate, every decision made with the kind of care that comes from understanding deeply and from long experience that the smallest deviation from accuracy can have consequences that no one can predict until they arrive. At 9:47, she set the sensor down. It was calibrated. It was done. She packed her toolbox. She stood and stretched and felt the familiar ache in her left shoulder, a consequence of an operation in a country she was not officially permitted to name, involving a shot she had made under conditions that made the 547-meter bullseye look in retrospect almost comfortable. She turned off the equipment bay light. She walked to her assigned housing unit on the far side of the base, moving through the quiet darkness with the automatic awareness of someone who has spent years in environments where darkness is not just an absence of light, but a tactical variable. She showered. She sat on the edge of her bunk. She looked at the wall for a moment. Tomorrow Kane would set up his verification. He would control every variable. He would bring his 12 trainees and his instructors in his documentation system, and he would watch with absolute certainty for the evidence of fraud or luck or mediocrity that he had already decided was hiding behind that impossible shot. Emily thought about what she felt. She felt calm. She felt the particular settled quality that comes not from confidence in an outcome, but from clarity about who you are and what you are capable of, a quality that no amount of mockery or dismissal or crumpled paper thrown at your feet can actually touch. She lay down. She slept. Outside at the monitoring station, Private First Class Danny Reyes was finishing his duty rotation and filing the automated incident report that the system required whenever a restricted lane was used without prior authorization. He filled in the fields, carefully timed duration equipment, used personnel involved. In the field marked Personnel Emily Carter, Equipment Management Specialist, Fort Raven Tactical Training Center. He submitted the report. It went into the system. And somewhere in an office building in a city that was not Arizona, a notification appeared on a screen that was monitored by people whose job description did not appear in any public document and whose connection to Fort Raven's shooting program was not on the surface obvious. Someone read the notification. Someone picked up a phone. Someone said quietly and without any particular drama, 3 words that set in motion a sequence of events that would arrive at Fort Raven within 48 hours and change everything. The 3 words were, "She's been found." But Emily Carter didn't know that yet. She was asleep in a bunk in a housing unit on the quiet side of Fort Raven, and tomorrow she had a shot to make. One chance, in front of everyone. And Commander Victor Kane in his own quarters across the base was awake. I was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, and he was doing what he did every night, running calculations, going over the details, preparing. He had spent 20 years becoming the best at what he did. He had spent 20 years understanding shooting and strategy and the architecture of pressure, how it reveals weakness, how it exposes the distance between what someone claims to be and what they actually are. Tomorrow he would apply all of that experience to a woman who cleaned rifles and organized supply crates. He had no doubt about the outcome. None. He was certain with the particular certainty of someone who has been right so many times that he has forgotten what it feels like to be wrong, that tomorrow would confirm everything he already believed. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep as easily as Emily did. And in the morning at 05:57, 3 minutes before Kane's ordered assembly time, Emily Carter was already on the range. She had already walked the shooting position. She had already checked the wind. She was standing with her hands at her sides, looking out at lane 7, and she was completely still. Marcus Webb arrived at 0600 exactly and saw her there before anyone else appeared. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the range. He looked at her again. And he made a decision in that moment that he would later describe as the most important professional decision of his career. He stepped onto the range and stood quietly about 20 feet to her left, not saying anything, just being there. Emily noticed. She said nothing, but the expression on her face, barely perceptible in the early Arizona morning, shifted by exactly the amount required to indicate that she had seen him, that she understood what he was doing, and that it mattered. The rest of them arrived at 0603. Kane came last. He looked at the range. He looked at his documentation team already setting up. He looked at the target, confirmed, measured, documented, at 1,547 meters, identical to the previous afternoon. He looked at Emily Carter. She was already at the shooting position. He said, "Begin," and the world held its breath. The range was cold at 6 in the morning. Not cold the way. Winter is cold. This was Arizona, and Arizona does not do winter the way the rest of the country does. This was the specific cold of early desert morning. The kind that sits on your skin and reminds you that heat is something the sun provides, not something the earth keeps for you. Emily Carter did not appear to notice the cold. She was already in position when Kane arrived. Already settled, already still, already somewhere inside herself, that the cold in the early hour and the 14 people now watching her from behind the safety line could not reach. Kane looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned to his documentation team, Sergeant First Class Holloway, who ran the monitoring systems, and Corporal Tran, who handled the physical verification equipment, and said, "Confirm the target distance." Holloway checked. 1,547 meters, sir. Confirmed by both laser and manual measure. Environmental readings. Wind northwest at 11 miles per hour. Temperature 41 degrees. Humidity 18%. Atmospheric pressure stable. Kane nodded once. He turned back to the range. He clasped his hands behind his back, the posture of a man who is so certain of what is about to happen that he has already arranged himself for the aftermath. "One round," he said to Emily. "Same conditions as last night. Proceed when ready." The 12 trainees stood in a line behind the safety barrier. Most of them were quiet. A few were whispering. Marcus Webb was not whispering. He was watching Emily with the focused attention of someone who has decided that whatever's about to happen, he is going to see all of it. Instructor Briggs stood to Kane's left. He had his arms crossed again. He had a particular expression on his face, not quite a smile, not quite contempt, but something in the territory between the two. The expression of a man who expects confirmation and is already tasting it. Emily did not look at any of them. She looked at the target. She breathed in. She breathed out. She adjusted her position by less than a centimeter, a micro adjustment that Holloway, watching through his scope, noted with a slight furrowing of his brow, because it was the kind of adjustment that experienced shooters made, and that you didn't expect from someone who was supposed to be equipment staff. She fired. The sound rolled across the range and came back. Holloway looked at his monitor. He looked at it again. He pressed 2 buttons and looked a 3rd time. Target confirmed, he said. His voice was perfectly neutral in the way that voices become perfectly neutral when the person speaking is trying very hard not to show that they are shaken. Bullseye, dead center. The silence that followed was different from the silence the night before. The night before, Emily had been alone. The silence then had been private between her and the range and the single shot that had found its mark. This silence had 14 people in it. It had Commander Victor Kane in it. Kane did not move. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and he looked at the monitor over Holloway's shoulder, and something happened in his face, a very small thing, a tightening around the eyes that lasted less than a second before the professional composure reasserted itself. Again, he said. Emily turned her head slightly. Again, Bouillon. You heard me? Again. She loaded a 2nd round. She fired. Bullseye. Again, Kane said. Briggs uncrossed his arms. Even he looked uncertain now. Emily fired a 3rd time. Bullseye. The trainees behind the safety line were no longer whispering. They had gone completely quiet in the way that groups go quiet when they are collectively processing something that doesn't fit the categories they've been given. Marcus Webb had his hands at his sides and his jaw set and his eyes on Emily Carter with an expression that was no longer uncertainty. It had moved definitively into something closer to recognition. Like he was watching a thing he had always believed was possible but had never actually seen. Kane walked forward. He walked past the safety line, past Holloway's monitoring station, past the shooting position, and he stood about 10 feet from Emily Carter and looked at her. This was the closest he had been to her since her arrival at Fort Raven. In the full morning light, with the clarity of someone who has just had 3 consecutive confirmations of something impossible. He looked at her the way he should have looked at her 6 weeks ago. He looked at her like a person. And what he actually saw when he was looking without the filter of assumption, was someone who was not surprised by what she had just done, not relieved, not anxious, not performing. She was simply present. Like this was not the most impressive thing she had ever done. Like this was not even close. Who are you? Kane said. His voice was different now. The performance was gone. What was left was something rawer and more honest, the voice of someone who has just realized the ground under him is not what he thought it was. Emily Carter, she said, equipment management. That's not what I mean. I know, she said. Silence. Kane took a breath. He was recalculating. She could see it happening the same way she had seen it the night before, but this time the calculation was different because the variables had changed fundamentally and he knew it. Where did you train? He said. The same places you read about in classified documents, Emily said. In a few places that aren't in any documents at all. Behind Kane, Briggs made a sound that was not quite a word. Marcus Webb took another step forward. Kane stared at Emily for 3 more seconds. Then he turned to Holloway. Pull her personnel file, he said. Holloway was already at his tablet. He typed. He waited. He typed again. He waited longer. He looked up at Kane. Sir, he said, her file is restricted. Restricted, Kane repeated. Yes, sir. Access denied. My clearance level isn't sufficient. The temperature of the morning, already cold, seemed to drop another degree. Kane looked at Holloway. He looked at Emily. He looked back at Holloway. What clearance level is required? He said. Holloway looked at his screen. He read the classification code. His face went slightly pale. Sir, he said carefully, that's a level I've only seen twice in my career. And both times it was for, he stopped. For what? Kane said. Holloway glanced at Emily. He looked back at Kane. Special operations personnel, he said. Tier 1 level. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Emily had heard since she arrived at Fort Raven. Behind the safety line, one of the trainees, a young woman named Specialist Rosa Vargas, who had been among the loudest laughers the night before, pressed her hand briefly over her mouth and then lowered it and said nothing. Kane turned back to Emily. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. You're going to explain this to me, he said, right now. No, Emily said. I blinked. Excuse me. No, she said again with the same even tone she had used every single time she had spoken in front of him. I'm not going to explain it to you right now. I'm going to finish the verification you requested. And then we're going to move to the next challenge you've prepared, because I know you didn't come out here with just a distance shot in mind, Commander. You came prepared. Another silence. Kane stared at her. Then very slowly, something changed in his expression. Not softening, that's not the right word for what happened. It was more like a rearrangement, like a man who had walked into a room expecting to be the largest thing in it and found the dimensions were different than he'd measured. He turned to Briggs. "Set up the moving target course," he said quietly. Briggs stared at him. "Sir." "Set it up, Briggs." Briggs set it up. The moving target course at Fort Raven was not the kind of thing you improvised. It required the activation of the automated track system, which ran steel target carriers along 4 different rails at variable speeds, changing direction at irregular intervals, controlled by a randomization algorithm that Kane himself had programmed to eliminate any predictability that a shooter might exploit. It was designed to be difficult. It was designed to replicate the real-world impossibility of combat shooting the moment when your target is not standing still, is not cooperative, is not going to wait while you calculate your shot. It took Briggs and Holloway 22 minutes to prepare. During those 22 minutes, Emily stood at the edge of the range and said nothing. She was not fidgeting. She was not pacing. She was not doing the thing that most people do when they are waiting under pressure, which is to demonstrate through their body that the pressure exists. She was doing what she always did when she had time. She was observing. Specifically, she was observing the trainees. All 12 of them had gathered in a loose cluster behind the safety line. They were talking in the quiet, intense way of people who have collectively experienced something that has reorganized their understanding of a situation. She watched their faces. She watched who was speaking and who was listening and who was standing at the edges processing privately. She watched Marcus Webb, who was doing something unexpected. He had pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and was writing in it, taking notes. At a moment when no one had asked him to, when there was no instruction or evaluation attached to his actions, he had decided that what he was witnessing was worth documenting. Emily filed that away. She watched Specialist Vargas, who had stopped talking and was now looking at Emily with an expression that had moved from embarrassment through confusion and arrived at something that was almost not quite, but almost respect. Vargas was the kind of person who recalibrated quickly. Emily recognized the type. Whatever she thought about Emily Carter an hour ago was already being revised. The question was what she'd build in its place. She watched Briggs moving through the target course setup with efficient practice movements, not looking at Emily, not looking at Kane, keeping his eyes on the mechanical task as if the mechanical task were the only thing in the world. Emily understood that too. Briggs was someone whose certainty was built on the architecture of other people's certainty, specifically Kane's. When Kane's certainty developed cracks, Briggs didn't yet know what to replace it with. He was doing the thing that people do in that situation, working. Staying busy, postponing the recalibration for later. "Ready," Briggs said finally. Kane turned to Emily. 5 moving targets, random speeds, random directions. No prior knowledge of the sequence. "Understood," Emily said. "You'll have a standard magazine. Time limit is at my discretion." "That's not standard protocol," Emily said. "No," Kane said, "it's not." She looked at him for a moment. He was watching her with eyes that were calculating and sharp, and though he would never have admitted it, afraid. Not afraid of her exactly. Afraid of what her existence meant for the narrative he had built, the narrative that had organized 20 years of decisions and judgments and the comfortable certainty of a man who believed he understood his world completely. "Understood," Emily said again. She moved to the position. The first target appeared. It was moving left to right at a speed she estimated at 30 kilometers per hour, with a slight variation in trajectory that suggested the randomization algorithm had introduced a lateral drift. She tracked it for 1.5 seconds. She fired. It fell. The second target came from the opposite direction and at twice the speed, dropping in elevation as it moved. She pivoted. She fired. It fell. The third target moved in a Z pattern, the kind of movement that breaks a shooter's rhythm because the human visual system is trained to predict linear continuation, and a Z pattern violates that expectation at the moment of commitment. Emily did not commit to the first direction. She waited for the pattern to establish itself, which took less than a second. She fired at the apex of the second angle. It fell. Marcus Webb had stopped writing. He was just watching now, his notebook hanging open at his side pen, forgotten. The fourth target came fast, the fastest yet a near horizontal trajectory that gave her approximately zero point 0.8 seconds of viable shooting window. She did not wait. She moved with it, leading by the exact calculation of speed and distance that her hands understood before her conscious mind had finished the equation. She fired. It fell. The range was completely silent. The fifth target appeared, and it didn't move. It appeared at a distance slightly beyond the established course boundary, not on any of the four rails, not part of the randomization system, and it was stationary, and it was at a distance that Holloway, staring at his monitoring screen, would later measure at 963 meters. Emily had not been told about a fifth target. This was not part of the arranged verification. She understood immediately what it was. It was Kane's contingency. The thing he had prepared for the scenario where everything else failed, a final challenge that wasn't in the briefing deployed at the moment of maximum psychological pressure, designed to catch her off guard and off balance, and demonstrate that her performance had limits. She turned her head and looked at Kane. He met her eyes, said nothing. She turned back to the target, 963 meters. She had fired at 547 meters the night before. She took one breath. She fired. The target fell, and Commander Victor Kane made a sound. It was not a word. It was not a command or a statement or a question. It was the sound a person makes when something they have built their understanding of the world around suddenly proves insufficient, a quiet, involuntary exhalation that carried in it the weight of 20 years of certainty, making contact with an immovable fact. Briggs took one step backward. Holloway said very quietly, "My God." Marcus Webb said, he looked at Emily Carter, and the expression on his face was the expression you carry for the rest of your life when you witness something that recalibrates your understanding of what is possible. The trainees behind the safety line had fractured into complete silence, the kind of silence that is not absence of sound, but presence of too much thought, too fast to fit into any available words. Emily lowered the rifle. She turned around. She looked at Commander Kane across the distance between them, not a long distance, not more than 30 feet, but in that moment it felt like the kind of distance that is measured in something other than feet. "Do you have more?" she said. Kane looked at her. He looked at the range behind her, at the 5 fallen targets at Holloway's monitoring screens. He looked at her. "No," he said. One word, honest for the first time since the beginning of this. Emily nodded once. She handed the rifle to Holloway with both hands muzzle down. The way you handle a weapon when you have been handling weapons long enough that the handling itself is a language that said clearly to anyone who knew how to read it, "I know exactly what this is, and I know exactly what I'm doing." Holloway took it. Emily turned to leave the range. "Wait," Kane said. She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She stood with her back to him for one beat, not a long beat, not a dramatic pause, just the natural half-second of someone deciding whether the request behind them is worth answering. She turned. "You owe me an explanation," Kane said. His voice had lost the performance entirely. He was speaking like a person, now a person who was genuinely uncomfortably confused about what was happening in front of him. "I need to understand what I'm looking at." "What you're looking at," Emily said, "is a shot grouping that your monitoring system has already documented and confirmed. What you're looking at is a human being who has spent years developing a capability that you decided wasn't present because of the uniform she was wearing." She paused. "That's what you're looking at, Commander." Kane's jaw was tight. "That's not an explanation." "You didn't ask for an explanation," Emily said. "You asked me to prove myself. I proved myself 3 times over." "Who sent you here?" Kane said. The question landed differently than his previous ones. It was a different kind of question, not about her capability anymore, but about her purpose, about why she was at Fort Raven, specifically in that specific role at that specific time. Emily looked at him for a moment. "I came here on my own," she said. "People don't just arrive at classified training facilities and support roles," Kane said. "Not people with Tier 1 clearances, not people who shoot like that." "No," Emily agreed, "they don't." "Then why?" "Because," Emily said, and her voice was still even, but there was something in it now, something real and unguarded, that had not been present in any of her previous responses. "I needed to understand what kind of program this is, what kind of people it's producing, what kind of leader is shaping those 12 trainees." She paused. "And now I understand." The silence that followed was the longest of the morning. Kane looked at Emily. He looked at his trainees, 12 of them standing in a cluster watching this exchange with the focused attention of people who understand that they are witnessing something important. He looked at Briggs, who had no expressions available for this situation and was therefore wearing the absence of one. He looked at Holloway, who was studiously examining his monitoring equipment. He looked back at Emily. "And what did you find?" Kane said. His voice was quiet, controlled. But underneath the control was something that Emily recognized, something that required honesty, because it was the sound of a person who was actually asking. Emily held his gaze. "Come find me when the day's training is done," she said. "We'll talk then." She walked off the range. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke until she was through the gate and gone from sight, moving toward the equipment bay with the same unhurried steadiness with which she did everything. Then Marcus Webb said quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Has anyone else been completely wrong about her this entire time?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Kane stood where he was for another 10 seconds. He was doing the thing he always did, calculating, organizing, determining the most strategically sound response to an unexpected situation. But the calculation was taking longer than usual, because the situation was more unexpected than any he had encountered in 20 years. And the calculating part of his mind kept running into a wall that was made not of missing information, but of misplaced assumption. He had decided who Emily Carter was the moment he saw her. He had been wrong, not slightly wrong, not wrong about the details, wrong about the category, wrong about the fundamental question of who she was and what she was capable of and why she was there. He turned to his trainees. "Training continues," he said. "Standard schedule. Move." They moved. But they moved differently than they had an hour ago. There was something altered in the way they held themselves, the way they looked at the range, the way they spoke to each other in low voices as they prepared for the morning session. Something had entered the atmosphere of Fort Raven's shooting program that morning, and it wasn't going to leave. Marcus Webb, walking toward his assigned station, stopped beside Specialist Vargas. "You remember 2 weeks ago," he said quietly, "when Briggs made that comment about the equipment lady, and everyone laughed." Vargas looked straight ahead. "Yeah," she said. Her voice was tight. "I laughed too," Marcus said. "I'm not proud of that." Vargas was quiet for a moment. "Neither am I," she said. They walked in silence for a bit. "Who do you think she is?" Vargas said. "Actually is, I mean." Marcus looked toward the equipment bay, the industrial building on the far side of the facility that he had walked past 100 times without ever really seeing. "I think," he said slowly, "that she's someone who's been exactly where we're trying to get to, and then went further." He paused. "A lot further." Vargas didn't say anything, but her expression changed. That afternoon, the standard training ran through its scheduled hours. Kane instructed with his usual precision and technical command. The session was externally indistinguishable from any previous session, but the internal temperature was different. The trainees were asking different questions. Not more questions, not louder questions, but deeper ones. Questions that came from a place of genuine uncertainty rather than the performance of engagement. Questions like, what are we missing and how would we know, and is the way we've been thinking about this actually right? Kane noticed it. He could not identify its source without admitting something he wasn't ready to admit, so he noted it in the category of unexplained variables and continued the session. At 16:45, he ended training. At 17:03, after his instructors had filed out and the trainees had been dismissed to their evening schedule, Kane walked across the base to the equipment bay. He knocked on the open door. Emily looked up from her workbench. "You came," she said. "I said I would," Kane said. "You said nothing," Emily said. "I said come find me. You made no commitment." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he stepped inside. He looked around the equipment bay, at the organized shelves, at the calibration equipment, at the field notebook on the corner of the workbench with new eyes. He was seeing it the way you see a room after you understand who lives in it. "Sit down if you want," Emily said. There was a metal stool near the workbench. Kane looked at it. He pulled it over and sat. He was not a man who was accustomed to sitting on metal stools in equipment bays, while someone else stood at a workbench, and the slight awkwardness of the position was visible in the set of his shoulders. Emily kept working. She did not stop what she was doing to accommodate the conversation. Kane watched her hands for a moment. The way they moved over the equipment, sure efficient, without wasted motion, and he recognized the signature of someone whose hands had done this or something like it for a very long time. I need to know who sent you, he said. I told you this morning, Emily said. I came on my own. That's not possible. A lot of things that happened this morning weren't supposed to be possible, Emily said. And yet, Kane was quiet. He sat with the discomfort of it for a moment, the specific discomfort of someone who is used to controlling the information in a conversation and has found himself twice in one day without that control. Then why am he? What are you actually looking for? Emily set down the tool she was holding. She turned and looked at Kane directly, the full attention of someone who had been observing him for 6 weeks and had collected in that time more information about him than he would ever be comfortable knowing. Your program is technically excellent, she said. The marksmanship instruction, the equipment, the physical training structure, all of it is genuinely first rate. But, Kane said, but the people coming out of it, Emily said, are learning one kind of precision and completely ignoring another. What other kind? The precision you apply to people, Emily said. The accuracy of your judgment about who someone is, what they're capable of, whether they deserve your attention. She let that sit for a second. You've trained 43 elite shooters. How many of them do you think made assumptions about someone based on their uniform that turned out to be catastrophically wrong? Kane's jaw moved. That's a combat situation risk, Emily said. That's not a philosophical problem. If a soldier can't accurately assess the people around them, ally asset threat, their technical skills are incomplete, and an incomplete shooter is a liability. Kane was quiet for a long time. The equipment bay was quiet too, the kind of quiet that happens when a conversation has reached the thing it was actually about after the preliminary rounds are done. You're saying I'm training them to be technically precise and psychologically blind, Kane said. I'm saying the culture you've built here teaches them to see rank and position and appearance instead of capability and character, Emily said. I walked into this base 6 weeks ago. I fixed equipment that was giving your trainees inaccurate readings. I identified calibration errors that could have affected their shot accuracy by as much as 4 inches at distance. I did all of that. She paused. Did anyone notice? Kane said nothing. Did anyone even ask my name? Emily said. Kane looked at her. The answer was visible on his face. One person, Emily said. One person in 6 weeks asked me anything about myself. One person treated me like I might have something worth knowing. She turned back to her workbench. That person is the trainee you should be watching the most carefully. Kane went still. Webb, he said. Emily said nothing, which was in the language that she and Kane had been developing over the course of an extraordinary day of confirmation. Kane sat on the metal stool in the equipment bay of Fort Raven as the afternoon light shifted outside the windows, and he thought about 20 years of building something. 20 years of precision and record-breaking and genuine expertise. 20 years of teaching other people to be excellent at a very specific, very demanding thing. And he thought about 6 weeks of a woman nobody saw. And he thought about 5 targets falling. And he thought about the moment that morning when he had thrown the report on the ground in front of her boots in front of 14 people and laughed. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice was quiet. It was the voice he used when something cost him, and this cost him. Anyone watching could see that it cost him. Emily did not respond immediately. She worked for another moment. Then she turned. Yes, she said, you do. Not accepting it yet. Not dismissing it, just acknowledging that it was owed, the simple, clear acknowledgement of someone who does not reduce their experiences to make other people more comfortable. Kane nodded. I'm sorry, he said, for this morning, and for 6 weeks before this morning. Emily looked at him for a moment. I know, she said, and I'll think about whether that's enough. That was all she said. Kane stood from the stool. He replaced it where he'd found it. He moved toward the door with a slightly different gait of a man who is carrying something new, not heavier, exactly, but distributed differently, like ballast that has been repositioned. He stopped in the doorway. Tomorrow's training, he said, the afternoon session is unscheduled. I blocked it for independent review time. He paused. I'd like you to be there, not as support staff. He left without waiting for an answer. Emily watched him go. She stood in the quiet of the equipment bay for a moment after the sound of his footsteps faded. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought about one shot at 1,547 meters. She thought about Marcus Webb standing on the range in the early morning saying nothing, just being there because he had understood that being there was the right thing to do, even when no one told him it was required. She thought about what Kane had said in the doorway, not as support staff. She turned back to her workbench. She still had work to do, but the nature of the work had changed. And somewhere in an office building far from Arizona, the people monitoring the automated incident report that Private First Class Danny Reyes had filed the night before were doing more than monitoring it now. They were moving. And what they were carrying toward Fort Raven, the truth about Emily Carter, that no one on this base except Emily herself fully knew was going to arrive within 24 hours, ready or not. The night after Kane's visit to the equipment bay, Fort Raven went quiet. The way military bases go quiet, not peacefully, but with the particular enforced stillness of a place where people are following schedules, rather than sleeping because they were actually at rest. Emily was not sleeping. She was at her workbench at 2200 hours, working through the last items on her calibration list when her personal communicator vibrated once on the metal surface beside her elbow. She looked at the screen. There was no caller identification. There was no number. There was only a single line of text that read, "They're coming, 0900 tomorrow. Be ready." She read it once. She set the communicator face down. She picked up her calibration tool and kept working. Be ready. She almost smiled at that, as if she had ever in her adult life been anything else. Across the base in this barracks, Marcus Webb was not sleeping either. He was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling with his notebook open on his chest, and he was doing the thing he did when something would not resolve in his mind. He was talking it through with himself, silently running the arguments and counter-arguments with the systematic rigor that had gotten him selected for this program in the first place. Who was Emily Carter? That was the question. And the more he turned it over, the more he understood that it wasn't one question, but three. Who had she been? Who was she now? And why here? Why Fort Raven? Why this program? Why this particular 6 weeks? He thought about the shot, both shots, all 5 of the moving targets, and the surprise 900-meter target that Kane had deployed like a last-ditch defensive move, and that Emily had taken apart with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to everything. I thought about the personnel file that Holloway's clearance couldn't open. He thought about what Vargas had said as they walked away from the range. She's someone who's been exactly where we're trying to get to, and then went further, a lot further. I thought about the equipment bay the way Emily had organized it in her first week, which he had never noticed because he had never actually looked. He walked past that building every day. He had never once considered what was happening inside it or who was doing it or what kind of person it took to maintain equipment at that level of precision. He felt lying there in his bunk the particular shame of someone who considers themselves observant and has just discovered a significant gap in their observation. At 0200, he got up, sat at his desk, and opened his notebook. He wrote for an hour, not about the shots, not about Emily's technical performance, about himself, about the assumptions he had carried into Fort Raven, and the assumptions he had never questioned because they had felt like facts, about the difference between facts and comfortable certainties, about how you tell them apart. He was still at his desk when the eastern sky began to lighten, and he made a decision. At 0530, Specialist Marcus Webb was knocking on the equipment bay door. Emily heard the knock and already knew who it was. She had been at the workbench since 5, finishing the final calibration on the wind sensor she'd been working on for 3 days, and she had heard the footsteps approaching with the particular cadence of someone who was moving with intention rather than habit. "Come in," she said. Marcus stepped inside. He looked at the equipment bay in the early morning light with the expression of someone seeing it properly for the first time, which he was. He had walked past this building every day for 6 weeks and had never actually seen it. Now he saw the organized shelves, the careful arrangement of tools, the precision of a space that had been ordered by a mind that understood the value of order, not as aesthetics, but as function. He looked at Emily. "I want to apologize," he said. Emily set down her tool. She turned. She looked at him. "For what specifically?" "For not asking sooner," Marcus said. "You've been here 6 weeks. I walked past this building every day. I never once—" He stopped, started again. "I thought about it last night. I noticed things about this program, about the instruction, about the culture. I wrote about it. I'm good at noticing." He paused. And then I look at the past 6 weeks and I didn't notice you. I chose not to notice you. And I don't think I can call that anything other than what it is. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You noticed me before anyone else did, she said. You were the first person on this base to speak to me as if I might be worth speaking to. I told Commander Kane last night that the trainee he should be watching most carefully is you. She picked up her tool again. Your apology is accepted. Now go get breakfast. Today is going to require your full attention. Marcus stood there for one more second. Can I ask you something, he said. You can ask. Why here, he said. Why support staff? Why 6 weeks of being invisible when you could have walked onto this base and he gestured at the range somewhere beyond the equipment bay walls. Why did it have to happen the way it happened? Emily was quiet for a moment. She looked at the wind sensor in her hands. Because, she said slowly, if I had walked onto this base wearing my actual credentials, everyone would have behaved themselves. Kane would have been respectful. The trainees would have been attentive. Briggs would have smiled and said all the right things. She looked at Marcus. And I would have seen a performance. And what I needed to see was the reality. She paused. Do you understand the difference? Marcus Webb was quiet for a moment. Yes, ma'am, he said. I do. He left. Emily watched him go and allowed herself alone in the equipment bay at 05:43 in the morning, one full, unguarded moment of something that was not quite hope, but was adjacent to it, the feeling that the work she had come here to do had found at least one person ready to receive it. Then she picked up the wind sensor and finished the calibration. At 08:15, 45 minutes before the visitors were scheduled to arrive, Instructor Briggs found Commander Kane in his office and closed the door behind him. Kane looked up from his desk. Briggs was not someone who closed doors. He was someone who knocked and entered and reported and left. Closed doors were for conversations that required containment, and Briggs had spent 17 years carefully avoiding those kinds of conversations. The fact that he was closing the door now told Kane that something had happened. Talk, Kane said. I did some research last night, Briggs said. On my own time. Personal inquiry, not official. He stopped. And, Kane said. Briggs looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at Kane. I know someone at the DoD personnel office. We served together years ago. I called him last night off the books, personal conversation, nothing official. I gave him Carter's name and asked him to check the system. He paused. He called me back at 0100. Kane said nothing. He waited. He couldn't access her file either, Briggs said. His clearance is higher than Holloway's. Significantly higher. He paused again. He told me the access restriction on her file is the kind they use for active special operations personnel whose identities need to be protected from unauthorized disclosure. He said in his 22 years he has seen that classification level on exactly 6 files. Silence. 6 files in 22 years, Kane repeated. Yes, sir. And he couldn't get into it. No, sir. Kane leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He was doing the calculation again, but the variables had changed so fundamentally from the calculation he had been running 24 hours ago that it was barely the same equation. Victor, Briggs said in the use of Kane's first name, something Briggs had done exactly 3 times in their shared service history, always at moments of personal significance, made Kane sit up straight and look at him directly. What did you say to her yesterday in the equipment bay, after training? Kane looked at him. The truth, Kane said, as much of it as I had access to. Briggs nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then, were we wrong about her? Kane looked at his desk. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. Yes, he said, we were wrong. Briggs absorbed that. He nodded once, a short, precise movement that acknowledged the weight of the thing without dramatizing it. What happens now? Briggs said. Kane looked at the clock on his office wall, 0822. In 38 minutes, he said, I think we're going to find out. 8:08:50, the base perimeter guard called the main building and said that 2 government vehicles had arrived at the gate. Black SUVs, federal plates, DoD credentials. The guard requested instruction. Kane authorized entry. He stood at the window of his office and watched the vehicles move through the gate and along the access road toward the main building. He watched them park. He watched the doors open. The first person out was a man in civilian clothes, mid-50s, the kind of build that said former military without advertising it, with the particular economy of movement of someone who had spent years in environments where wasted motion was a liability. He carried no briefcase, no folder, no visible documentation of any kind. The second person was a woman in uniform. Kane recognized the rank insignia immediately. He recognized it because it was the kind of rank you don't forget once you've seen it, the kind that appears infrequently enough that each sighting leaves a mark. Brigadier General. Kane was moving toward the door before he fully processed that he had decided to move. He met them in the hallway outside his office. He introduced himself. The man in civilian clothes introduced himself as Special Investigator Darnell Cross from the Office of the Inspector General. The woman in uniform was Brigadier General Patricia Owens, Joint Special Operations Command. Kane shook their hands. His face was controlled. His mind was running very fast. Commander Kane, General Owens said, we're here regarding an incident that was flagged by your base monitoring system 36 hours ago. A restricted lane access and unauthorized weapon use, and a performance record that triggered an automatic notification to our office. She paused. We're here regarding Emily Carter. I assume so, Kane said. We'd like to speak with her, Cross said. Directly. Of course, Kane said. I'll have someone. We know where she is, Owens said. Kane stopped. We've been tracking her location since she arrived on base, Cross said. His tone was not unkind, but it was absolute. The equipment bay, correct? Yes, Kane said. We'd like you to come with us, Owens said. This conversation involves the program here, and your understanding of what's happened in the past 36 hours is relevant to it. They walked together across the base to the equipment bay. Kane, Cross, Owens. The morning was clear and cold, and the kind of bright that Arizona does. Uniquely a brightness that seems to come from everywhere simultaneously, as if the air itself is luminous. Kane had made the walk to the equipment bay yesterday afternoon, feeling like a man carrying something he needed to put down. He made it now, feeling like a man walking toward an explanation he had been circling for 36 hours. Owens knocked. Come in, Emily said. They entered. Emily was at her workbench. She was working. She looked up when they entered, and something crossed her face, something quick and complicated that Kane, watching, could not entirely read. It was not surprise. Whatever it was not surprise. She looked at General Owens. General, she said. Emily, Owens said. The single word contained a history. Kane could hear it clearly, the particular compression of people who have known each other through things that don't appear in official records. Cross closed the equipment bay door. He looked at Kane. Commander, what I'm about to share with you is classified at a level above your current clearance. You're being granted temporary read-in by General Owens' authority for the specific purpose of understanding the situation at your facility. He paused. Are you ready to proceed? Kane looked at Emily. Emily met his eyes and said nothing. Yes, Kane said. Cross reached into his jacket and removed a single folded document. He handed it to Kane. Kane unfolded it. He read it. He read it a second time. He looked up. Master Chief Petty Officer, he said. Emily Carter, Naval Special Warfare Command. He looked at the document again. Tier 1 designation, active status. He looked at Owens. She's still active. She never stopped being active, Owens said. Her assignment here, the support role, the equipment management function, that was a sanctioned observation assignment, authorized at the highest level. She glanced at Emily. We've been concerned about the culture developing inside certain training programs. Not the technical quality, the human quality. The judgment quality. She looked back at Kane. Your program was flagged 18 months ago by a performance analysis that identified a pattern of, she paused, choosing the word carefully, selective attention among graduates. Outstanding technical shooters who were demonstrating significant blind spots in field assessment and interpersonal judgment. The room was very quiet. Kane looked at the document in his hands. He looked at Emily. You were the test, he said. I was the observer, Emily said. There's a difference. She wasn't here to expose you, Commander Cross said. She was here to document the culture. The observation was scheduled to end at 8 weeks with a report submitted to our office and no other action taken. He paused. The incident with the restricted lane changed the timeline. Kane thought about the sound he had made when the fifth target fell. The involuntary exhalation. He thought about the document in his hands. He thought about 20 years. How long have you been doing this, he said to Emily. The observation work. This was my third facility, Emily said, in 4 years. And the other two resulted in program adjustments, Cross said. Restructured leadership in one case, revised cultural training protocols in the other. He paused. Fort Raven is the most complex situation we've encountered. Why? Kane said. Cross looked at Owens. Owens looked at Emily. Emily set down her tool. Because here, she said, the technical program is genuinely exceptional. The two previous facilities I observed had quality problems in the instruction itself, bad technique, outdated methodology. That made the cultural problem easier to address because fixing the instruction fixed the environment. She paused. Here the instruction is right. The technical training is exactly what it should be, which means the cultural problem isn't hiding behind a technical failure. It's standing alone. It's a choice. She looked at Kane. Your people are learning to be precise with rifles and imprecise with people. And the program is good enough that nobody has noticed because the graduates are technically exceptional and technical excellence has been covering for the other thing. Kane was quiet for a long time. Until now, he said. Until now, Emily agreed. Cross and Owens exchanged a look. Commander Kane, Owens said, we have a decision to make about the next steps for this facility. That decision involves your cooperation and your honesty. I need to know before we go any further whether you understand what we're talking about. Kane folded the document. He looked at Emily. He looked at Owens. Yes, he said. I understand. Fully, Owens said. Fully, Kane said. I threw a report on the ground in front of a Tier 1 operator and let 14 trainees laugh at her. I understand what that means. The silence that followed was short and sharp and real. Good, Owens said. Auto on 47, the decision was made to assemble the full training class. All 12 trainees, all instructors in the main briefing room. Kane delivered the order himself. He gave no explanation. He simply said assemble 10:30, and the quality of his voice, something in it that had not been there yesterday, made everyone who heard it understand that something significant was happening. The trainees filled the briefing room at 10:28. They sat in their assigned seats. They looked at each other with the expressions of people trying to decode a situation from incomplete information. Marcus Webb sat at the end of his row notebook closed on the desk in front of him, hands folded on top of it, waiting. Briggs stood at the side of the room with his arms at his sides, not crossed. That detail was visible to anyone watching closely enough. At 10:30 exactly, Commander Kane entered the room. Behind him came General Patricia Owens, Special Investigator, Darnell Cross, and Emily Carter. Emily was not wearing her support uniform. She was wearing her service uniform, with her ribbons, with her rank, with everything that had been hidden for 6 weeks under the plain fabric of a support specialist's clothes. The briefing room went completely still. Marcus Webb looked at Emily's uniform. He looked at her rank. His expression moved through several phases in approximately 2 seconds. Recognition, then understanding, then something larger that didn't have a single name, but included respect and revelation, and the particular feeling of having suspected something extraordinary and been confirmed. Specialist Vargas made a sound that was not a word. Several of the other trainees looked at each other. Several looked at Kane. Several looked at Emily and could not look away. General Owens stood at the front of the room. Good morning, she said. I'll be brief because the situation is relatively clear and you're smart enough to understand it without extensive explanation. She looked across the room. The woman you have known for 6 weeks as Equipment Support Specialist, Emily Carter, is Master Chief Petty Officer. Emily Carter Naval, Special Warfare Command, Tier 1 designation with a service record that I am not at liberty to describe in full and wouldn't be long enough in this room to cover anyway. She paused. She was here at this facility in the role you observed as an authorized observer for this office. Her purpose was to assess the human quality of this program, specifically whether the culture here was producing shooters who could apply the same precision to judgment that they apply to marksmanship. Silence. The assessment, Owens continued, identified significant concerns. The trainees who had laughed the hardest on the range 2 days ago were now sitting with a particular quality of stillness that was different from attentiveness. It was the stillness of people who are processing a specific personal accountability. Vargas's face had gone pale. You are each going to have the opportunity to speak with Master Chief Carter individually over the next 2 days, Owens said. Not as a disciplinary measure, as a development exercise. She has things to teach you that are not in the technical curriculum. And this office believes that learning them now at this stage of your training will make you significantly more effective operators. She looked at Kane. Commander Kane has agreed to restructure the remaining program schedule to accommodate this. Kane nodded. Any questions? Owens said. Marcus Webb raised his hand. Owens looked at him. Specialist. For Master Chief Carter, Marcus said. He looked directly at Emily. What's the one thing you needed us to understand if you had to reduce the past 6 weeks to a single lesson? What would it be? The room waited. Emily looked at Marcus. She looked at the 12 trainees in front of her, the laughers and the silent ones and the uncertain ones, and Marcus himself with his notebook and his questions and his particular honesty. She looked at Varg, who was sitting with her hands flat on the desk in front of her, unmoving, wearing the expression of someone in the middle of a fundamental revision. She looked at the room. A rifle doesn't care who's holding it, Emily said. The bullet doesn't know your rank or your reputation or how many records you've broken or what your commanding officer thinks of you. It goes where it goes based on physics, on reality, not on assumption. She paused. People are the same. They are what they are, regardless of what you decide they are before you actually look. The greatest targeting error you can make is not a miscalculation of distance or wind. It's a miscalculation of the person next to you. She looked at Kane. Or the person you've decided doesn't matter enough to see. The room was completely quiet. Then Briggs from the side of the room said quietly, "That's the lesson." Nobody expected Briggs to speak. The unexpected quality of it made it land harder. Cross was writing in his own notebook. Owens was watching the trainees with the assessment eyes of someone building a report in real time. And Marcus Webb had opened his notebook. He was writing. General Owens nodded at Emily. It was a small gesture, a slight incline of the head, the kind of acknowledgement that carries the weight of shared history and mutual respect between two people who have operated in places where the cost of failure is not measured in points on a performance review. Emily nodded back. At 11:15, the briefing ended. Owens and Cross moved to a secured space in the main building for their internal documentation process. The trainees were dismissed to prepare for the afternoon session. Kane stayed. When the room was empty except for the two of them, Kane looked at Emily Carter in her service uniform, with her ribbons and her rank and everything that 6 weeks of deliberate invisibility had kept hidden. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Personal question. You don't have to answer it." "Go ahead," Emily said. "Was it hard?" he said. 6 weeks of being treated the way you were treated, knowing what you know, having what you have." He paused. "Was it hard to say nothing?" Emily was quiet for a moment. Genuinely quiet, not strategic silence, but the silence of someone actually reaching for an honest answer. "Some days," she said. "Some days it was harder than others." She paused. "The morning after Briggs made the comment in the briefing room. The day the comment got back to me. That was a harder day." Kane looked at the floor. You should have," Emily agreed. "But you didn't, and neither did any of the other 12 people in that room who heard it." She looked at him. "That's the record, Commander. That's what actually happened. The question now is what happens after." Kane looked at her. "What do you need from me?" he said. "To make this right, what do you actually need?" Emily thought about it. "Be wrong," she said, out loud, in front of them, not in a briefing room with a general present and official documentation being taken. Stand in front of your trainees on the range where it happened and be wrong without making it a performance." She paused. "That's what they need to see. Not the apology, the honesty." Kane was quiet for a long time. "That's harder than a 1,500-meter shot," he said. "Yes," Emily said, "it is." Kane looked at her. Something in his face had settled into a quality that had not been there before. Not defeat, not humility exactly, but something earned. The expression of someone who has had a significant thing proven about themselves and is deciding consciously to be different on the other side of it. "Okay," he said, one word. Emily nodded. Outside, through the walls of the briefing room, the base had resumed its sounds. Footsteps, voices, the distant clang of the equipment bay, the muffled communication of a living, working military installation. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. But nothing at Fort Raven was exactly ordinary anymore. In the barracks, Marcus Webb was sitting on his bunk, writing in his notebook with the focused speed of someone trying to capture something before it fades. He was writing about the past 36 hours, about what he had seen, about what it meant. He wrote, "The person nobody looked at was the person who had already done everything we're trying to do." She saw all of us clearly for 6 weeks while we never saw her once. That is not a failure of skill. That is a failure of attention. And attention is a choice. He stopped. He read it back. He underlined the last sentence. Attention is a choice. Across the base in the equipment bay, Emily Carter sat at her workbench one final time. She had a piece of work left to finish, one last calibration. The wind sensor she had been working on since the beginning. She picked up the tool. She made the final adjustment. She set the sensor down and checked the reading. Perfect. She looked at the equipment bay around her. At the 6 weeks of organized work, the labeled shelves, the calibration records, the careful evidence of someone who had been present and attentive and competent in a space where nobody had thought to look. She stood, she picked up her field notebook. She wrote one final entry, observation complete. Culture identified. First corrective steps initiated. One trainee distinguished by demonstrated quality of attention and character. Recommend continued monitoring of Specialist Marcus Webb for advanced leadership development. Recommend Commander Kane for remediation and retention, technical excellence present, cultural correction, possible willingness to self-examine, confirmed. She closed the notebook. She looked at the equipment bay for one last moment. Then the door opened. General Owens stood in the doorway. "We need to talk about your next assignment," Owens said. Emily looked at her. "Not yet," Emily said. Owens raised an eyebrow. "I told someone I'd be at the afternoon training session," Emily said. "I have something to finish here first." Owens looked at her for a moment. Then very slowly she nodded. "Oh, 1500, Owens said. "My office. Don't be late." "I'm never late," Emily said. Owens almost smiled. She left. Emily stood alone in the equipment bay for one final moment. She thought about the shot. The one at the beginning of all of this, the single round she had loaded and fired in the fading Arizona afternoon light, alone on a range where she was not supposed to be at a target that was too far away, with no spotter and no team and no one watching. She had not fired it to prove something. She had fired it because the target was there, and she was there, and the rifle was ready, and she was the person she was. And sometimes the truest thing you can do is exactly the thing that comes most naturally when nobody is watching. The shot had found its mark, and in doing so, it had found something else entirely. It had found the truth, not just about Emily Carter, about all of them. And the truth once found does not go back into hiding. It does not fit anymore in the places it used to live. It stands in the middle of everything solid and unmovable and asks the same question of everyone who encounters it. Now that you know, what will you do? The afternoon training session was scheduled for 1300 hours. At 12:45, Commander Victor Kane was standing alone at the edge of the main range. Not in position, not reviewing notes, not running through a session plan, in his head, the way he normally did in the 15 minutes before his trainees arrived. He was just standing there looking at Lane 7, at the distance that stretched out to where a target stood, and where 2 days ago a woman nobody saw had done something nobody believed was possible. He had been standing there for 11 minutes when he heard footsteps behind him. He expected Briggs. It was Marcus Webb. Kane turned. Marcus stopped about 6 feet back because he had not been invited forward, and he was someone who understood that some spaces required an invitation. He looked at Kane. Kane looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You're early," Kane said. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "Why?" Marcus thought about it. "Because I wanted to see if you were okay, sir, before everyone else got here." Kane stared at him. He had been commanding troops for 20 years. He could count on one hand the number of times a junior soldier had asked him without being prompted and without any bureaucratic structure around the asking whether he was okay. He turned back to the range. "Specialist Webb," he said, "if I ask you a direct question, will you give me a direct answer?" "Yes, sir." "In your honest assessment, and I mean your actual assessment, not the one that keeps you out of trouble, what was the culture here before Carter showed up?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Excellent at what it measured," he said carefully, "and blind to what it didn't." Kane nodded once. "What did it not measure?" "People, sir," Marcus said. "We measured performance. We measured output. We measured who could hit what from how far and under what conditions. We never measured who someone actually was, what they actually knew, what they'd actually been through." He paused. "And I think the problem was that we told ourselves measuring performance was the same thing as measuring people. And it isn't. Kane turned and looked at Marcus directly. How long have you known that? Kane said. Marcus met his eyes. Longer than I've been willing to say out loud, sir. The honesty landed hard. Kane looked at the young soldier in front of him, 24 years old from Savannah, with a notebook full of observations and the particular courage of someone who tells the truth even when the room isn't safe for it. When the others get here, Kane said, I need you to say that, what you just told me, in front of everyone. Marcus blinked. Sir. Not a performance, Kane said, not a rehearsed statement. What you just said to me right now, I need the people in this program to hear it from someone their own age who has been inside the same experience they've been inside. He paused. Will you do that? Marcus held Kane's gaze. Yes, sir, he said. I'll do that. At 1300 exactly, the full training class assembled on the main range. All 12 trainees, Instructor Briggs, and the monitoring team. Emily was there too in her service uniform, with her rank visible standing at the edge of the group rather than in front of it, in the particular position of someone who is present as a witness rather than a director. General Owens was not there. Cross was not there. This moment was not going to be official. It was going to be human. Kane had been clear about that. He stood in front of his trainees and he looked at them. Not over them, not past them, at them, the specific focused person-by-person attention that he had failed consistently to apply to the woman who had been 10 minutes away for 6 weeks. I was quiet for long enough that the trainees understood something was different. Long enough that Briggs, standing to the side, shifted his weight slightly. Long enough that Marcus Webb near the back of the group stood very still. 2 days ago, Kane said, I stood on this range and threw a documented shot report on the ground and let you watch me do it. Some of you laughed. He looked at the people who had laughed. He did not flinch from their faces. I'm responsible for that. The laugh didn't start with you. It started with the permission I gave you to see someone as less than they were in the model I built here that made that kind of dismissal feel normal. He paused. That's on me. Not partially, fully. Nobody moved. Fort Raven has the best technical shooting program in this country, Kane said. That's not pride talking. That's documented fact. And I built it. I'm proud of it. That part was right. He paused. But I also built something else here, and I didn't see it because I wasn't looking. I built a culture where your value was determined by what you look like, what you wore, and what I had already decided about you before you ever had a chance to show me who you actually were. He looked at Emily. I had a Tier 1 operator in my equipment bay for 6 weeks, and I walked past that building every single day and never once asked a single question. Vargas made a sound, very small, very controlled, but audible. Kane heard it. He looked at her. You're not alone in that, specialist, he said. Every person on this range is in the same position, including me, especially me. He turned back to the full group. I'm not going to pretend this is a complete correction. One speech on the range doesn't undo 6 weeks of demonstrated pattern. What I'm telling you is that I see it now, and what happens in this program from this moment forward is going to be different. He looked at Marcus. Specialist Webb, you said you wanted to add something. Marcus stepped forward. The trainees watched him. There was a slight surprise in the group. Marcus was respected, but not centrally positioned, not the loudest or the most decorated. His stepping forward carried an unexpectedness that made people pay attention. 2 days ago, I walked past the equipment bay for the 100th time, Marcus said, and I had the same thought I always had, which was no thought at all. That building existed in my mind as background, as infrastructure, the same way a chair exists. He stopped. He looked at his hands for a second, then back up. And I've been thinking about that for 48 hours, about what it means that I could be in the same facility as someone for 6 weeks walking past her work every day, benefiting from her calibrations and her repairs and her organization, and never once think to ask who she was. He paused. I call myself an observer. I take notes. I ask questions. He looked at Emily. I asked Master Chief Carter one question in 6 weeks. One, and that was only because something impossible happened and I couldn't avoid the evidence anymore. He looked back at his fellow trainees. I want to be better than that. I think we can be better than that. But first, we have to be honest that that's what we were. Silence. Then Specialist Rosa Vargas said, I laughed. Her voice was steady and direct and cost her something visible. The night it happened when Commander Kane, when he threw the report on the ground. I was one of the people who laughed, And I've been telling myself since then that it was reflex, it was social, it was automatic. She stopped. But the truth is, I had already decided who she was, before I knew anything. I looked at the uniform and I made a decision, and then I never revisited it. She looked at Emily. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology was not directed at a symbol or a lesson. It was directed at a person, at Emily Carter, who received it the way she received everything directly, without performance, without the artificial comfort that would have reduced its weight. Wait, thank you, Emily said. That matters. One by one, in the minutes that followed, 4 more trainees said something. Not all 12, some were not ready, and that was real. And Emily understood that readiness could not be mandated. But 4 more, 4 different confessions of 4 different specific moments. A comment made in the barracks, a dismissal offered in conversation, a joke that nobody pushed back on, a moment of noticing and choosing not to notice. Kane listened to all of it. He did not manage it. He did not shape it. He let it happen. At 14:07, Emily stepped forward. I want to tell you something about the shot, she said. The group became immediately attentive. Not the technical part, she said. The technical part you can extrapolate from the monitoring data. I want to tell you why I fired it. She paused. I had been at Fort Raven for 6 weeks. I had documented everything I needed to document. I had watched the culture operate. I had identified the patterns. I had written my observations. The official observation period wasn't over, but in terms of my personal understanding of what was happening, here it was complete. She looked at the range, and then the gate opened. Everyone listened. I could have walked away, she said. I could have closed the gate and gone back to my workbench and filed the report and let the official process unfold the way it was designed to unfold. That would have been the appropriate, procedurally correct decision. She paused. But I looked at that target, 1,547 meters, and I thought about 6 weeks of being invisible. 6 weeks of work that nobody saw. 6 weeks of being present without being acknowledged. And I thought, she stopped. She looked at the group. I thought, I know who I am, and it's time for this place to know it too. The range was silent. That shot wasn't about proving anything to Commander Kane, Emily said, or to Briggs, or to any of you. It was about the truth of who I am, which had been sitting in that equipment bay for 6 weeks underneath an assumption that nobody had the curiosity to question. She looked at Kane. When you threw the report on the ground, you weren't just dismissing a shot, you were dismissing a truth. And the reason it shook this facility is not because the truth was surprising. It's because you had all the information you needed to see it, and you chose not to look. Kane held her gaze. Yes, he said, quietly. We did. At 15:03, Emily walked into General Owens's temporary office in the main building. Owens looked up. You're 3 minutes late. The conversation ran over, Emily said. How did it go? Emily thought about it. Like the truth going somewhere, it should have been going for a long time, she said. Uncomfortable, necessary, real. Owens nodded. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Emily sat. Between them on the desk was a folder, not thick, not thin, but the specific proportions of something that contains a significant decision. You know what this is, Owens said. I can guess, Emily said. The Inspector General's team completed their preliminary review this morning, Owens said. Their findings align with your observation report. The program here has systemic cultural deficiencies that are inconsistent with the leadership standards required at this level of training. She paused. They are recommending significant changes. She opened the folder. The question is who implements them? Emily looked at the folder. The office is recommending that Commander Kane be reassigned to an administrative role pending a structured remediation process, Owens said. That the program be placed under interim leadership while the cultural protocols are redesigned. She paused. And that you be offered the position of senior instructor with full authority to restructure the human elements of the curriculum. She looked at Emily. Effective immediately if you accept. The room was very quiet. Emily did not answer immediately. She looked at her hands. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought about the equipment bay and the wind sensors and the calibration tools, and the particular invisibility she had worn as deliberately as any uniform she had ever put on. The Kane recommendation, she said. The reassignment. Yes. I want to discuss it, Emily said. Owens raised an eyebrow. I was wrong, Emily said. He was significantly, seriously wrong. What happened on this range was not a minor lapse of judgment. It was a demonstration of a cultural problem that he built and maintained and modeled for 20 years. She paused. And she paused again. In the past 48 hours, he has done something that is genuinely difficult and that most people in his position would not have done. He came to my equipment bay and he sat on a metal stool and he said, "I'm sorry," without anyone requiring it. He stood in front of his trainees and he said, "I built this, I'm responsible. It stops now without a general present and without it being documented as anything official." She looked at Owens. He did those things because they were the right things to do, not because he was managed into doing them. Owens was quiet. "I think removing him is the wrong call," Emily said. "I think removing him takes the person who has the most to learn and the most to offer in the process of correction and sends him somewhere he can't apply either." She paused. "The remediation should happen here, with his trainees watching it happen. That's the lesson, not the lesson that there are consequences for getting it wrong, the lesson that it's possible to get it wrong, to see it, to own it, and to become different." She looked at Owens. "That's what you can't teach in a curriculum. You can only model it, and right now Kane is the most qualified person on this base to model it." Owens looked at her for a long time. "The IG team isn't going to love that recommendation," she said. "No," Emily agreed, "but it's the right one." Owens was quiet for another long moment. "You'll put that in writing," she said. "Yes. And if Kane fails the remediation, if the patterns continue, your recommendation is void and the reassignment proceeds." "Agreed," Emily said. Owens closed the folder. She looked at Emily with the particular expression she reserved for moments when someone had done something that genuinely surprised her. And Patricia Owens, who had served for 30 years and seen most of what the military could produce in human terms, was not easily surprised. "You came here to observe a culture," Owens said, "and you're choosing to repair it instead." "I came here to understand it," Emily said. Understanding it made repair feel like the obvious next step. At 16:30, Emily knocked on Kane's office door. Kane said, "Come in." He was at his desk. He looked up, he looked at Emily's expression, and whatever he read in it made him sit straighter, not from anxiety, but from the particular alertness of someone who senses that something important is about to happen. "The IG team's preliminary recommendation was to reassign you," Emily said. Kane went very still. "I recommended against it," Emily said. "I argued that you should remain, that the remediation should happen here, that removing you at this stage would remove the wrong lesson." She paused. "General Owens has agreed to review the recommendation. My assessment will be part of the official record." Kane stared at her. He was quiet for so long that the silence became its own presence in the room. "Wasdom, he said. His voice was stripped and clean, no command authority, no professional positioning, just the honest question of a person trying to understand a grace they did not earn. "Because you came to the equipment bay," Emily said. "You sat on a metal stool that was clearly uncomfortable, and you asked me what you could do to make it right, and you actually meant it. And that's not nothing, Commander. That is in fact the entire thing. That is the whole lesson. That is what I have been trying to locate in this program for 6 weeks." She looked at him. "The capacity for honest self-assessment under pressure. When your record is on the line and your authority is on the line and your reputation is on the line, can you still look at the truth without flinching?" She paused. "You flinched once. Then you stopped." Kane looked at his desk. He put his hands flat on its surface. He breathed. "There are conditions," Emily said. "The remediation is structured, it's monitored, and it includes formal training in the cultural competencies the program has been missing. It includes a review at 6 weeks and at 3 months. And it includes me in whatever capacity General Owens assigns, having direct oversight authority, Trishi, over the cultural elements of the curriculum going forward." "Understood," Kane said. "You'll need to tell Briggs," Emily said, "before the official notification comes through. He should hear it from you." Kane nodded. "And the trainees," Emily said, "not the official part, the human part. They should know that the process is forward-facing, that accountability isn't the end of the story." Kane looked up. "You'd let me tell them that." "I'd expect you to tell them that," Emily said. He held her gaze. "Master Chief Carter," he said, and the title, the actual title, her actual rank, spoken for the first time, by a man who had thrown her documented shot on the ground 2 days ago, carried the weight of everything that had happened between that moment and this one. You could have let them reassign me. Yes, Emily said, I could have. Why didn't you? Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought about the target at 1 meter after 47 meters and the way the truth feels when it finds exactly the place it was always meant to go. Because the easiest shot, she said, is not always the right one. Kane looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, not the professional nod of a commander acknowledging an order, the nod of a person acknowledging a debt and choosing to carry it correctly. Emily left his office. In the hallway, she paused. She took a breath. She looked at the floor at the plain institutional corridor of a military training facility that had, over the past 48 hours, become something entirely different from what it was when she arrived. Not different in its walls or its equipment or its ranges or its procedures. Different in the quality of attention its people were now paying to each other. Different in the questions being asked and the silences being filled and the small daily decisions about who deserves to be seen. Those differences were not large. They were not dramatic. They would not appear in any single data point or performance review. But Emily Carter understood from years of doing work that happened in the spaces nobody was watching that the small differences were always the ones that mattered. The small adjustments, on the micro corrections, the calibrations so precise that most people never notice they have been made. They only notice later that something is more accurate than it used to be. At 17:15, Marcus Webb was in the barracks writing in his notebook when Specialist Vargas knocked on the open door. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. She held one out to him. Marcus looked at it. He took it. Thank you, he said. Don't make it weird, she said. She came in and sat on the chair across from his desk. She looked at his notebook. Are you documenting all of this? Trying to, he said. Good, she said. Someone should. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She looked at the wall for a moment. I keep thinking about what she said. On the range, about the bullet not knowing who's holding it. She paused. That's going to stay with me for a long time. Me too, Marcus said. Vargas was quiet. Then I was so sure she was nothing. 6 weeks. I was completely sure. She shook her head. How do you become sure of something that wrong? Marcus thought about it. You stop asking, he said. That's all. You just stop asking who someone is and you accept whatever answer the environment gives you by default. He looked at his notebook. And the environment here was giving us a very specific default answer about her. That she was invisible, Vargas said. That she was invisible, Marcus agreed. They sat with all that for a moment. Webb, Vargas said. What do you think she's going to do now? Marcus looked at his notebook. He thought about Emily Carter in her service uniform, with her ribbons visible, standing at the edge of a group rather than at its front. He thought about the equipment bay and the wind sensor. He thought about the note she had taken all morning, observing with the quiet completeness of someone who misses nothing. I think, he said slowly, that whatever she does, she'll be doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because of what it gets her. He paused. That's what I'm trying to figure out how to be. Vargas looked at him. You're already closer than most of us, she said. She finished her coffee. She stood. She nodded once and left, and Marcus watched her go with the expression of someone watching the small evidence of a larger change happening in real time. He turned back to his notebook. He wrote, the hardest skill to train is the one that requires you to first admit you've been wrong. Everything else, wind calculation, trigger control, distance estimation. Those are mechanical. They can be built from zero, but honest self-assessment requires that you first see yourself clearly. And seeing yourself clearly means giving up the comfort of the version of yourself you'd prefer to believe in. He stopped. He read it back. I thought Master Chief Carter walked into this facility wearing invisibility like armor, and she used 6 weeks of being unseen to see everything. She knew who she was the whole time. She never needed us to see it to keep being it. He wrote that too. At 1800 hours, Emily was in the temporary workspace Owens had arranged for her in the main building, completing the formal version of her observation report. The document that would go to the Inspector General's office that would inform the structural recommendations for Fort Raven's program that would be read by people with authority over programs like this across the country. She wrote clearly. She wrote completely. She named what she had seen without softening it and without exaggerating it, because truth delivered with precision is more powerful than truth. delivered with emotion, and she knew this the way she knew everything she knew from direct, long, expensive experience. She wrote about the culture, she wrote about the pattern, she wrote about the 6 weeks of invisibility and what she had witnessed inside them. She wrote about Marcus Webb and the quality of attention he had demonstrated and the leadership potential she had observed in someone the program's formal evaluation metrics had not yet fully captured. She wrote about Victor Kane, his technical excellence, his cultural failure, his capacity for honest self-examination under pressure, and her recommendation that his remediation proceed at Fort Raven with structured oversight. She wrote about the shot, not extensively, just enough. One paragraph that described the conditions, the distance, the result, and the decision to fire not as a technical record, but as the moment that made everything else possible. The moment the truth decided it had been waiting long enough. She closed the document. She looked at the wall in front of her. She thought about the text message she had received the night before their coming. 0900 tomorrow. Be ready. She had been ready. She had been ready for 6 weeks. She had been ready, if she was being completely honest, for considerably longer than that, since the classified mission that had sent her into this particular kind of work. Since the day she understood that the battlefield she was most needed on was not measured in meters or terrain, but in the distance between what people assume and what is actually true. That distance was in some ways the hardest terrain she had ever operated in. And she had not missed a shot yet. She pressed send on the document. She closed her laptop. She sat in the quiet of the room and she breathed. And tomorrow was already arranging itself on the other side of the night, the first day of something that had no name yet, but that felt in the particular way that correct things feel when they finally arrive in the right place, exactly like what comes after the truth finds its mark. The morning after Emily sent her report, Fort Raven woke up differently. It was not dramatic. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no visible marker of the line between what the base had been and what it was becoming. The reveille sounded at the same time it always did. The trainees moved through their morning routines. The instructors arrived at the main building. Coffee was made, equipment was checked, but the silences were different. The silences had weight now, the specific weight of people who are thinking more carefully than they were 72 hours ago. People who have had something fundamental shifted inside them and are still feeling for where everything landed. Marcus Webb woke at 0500, 20 minutes before his alarm. He lay in the dark for a moment, then got up dressed and opened his notebook. He had been doing this every morning for 3 days now, reaching for the notebook before he reached for anything else, because the notebook was where he was putting the things that didn't fit anywhere else. He wrote day 4, the base feels like a person who has just said something true out loud for the first time. A little raw, a little uncertain, but lighter. He read it back. He thought, that's exactly right. At 06:15, Emily Carter was already on the range. Not lane 7 this time. The standard training range lanes 1 through 6 where the regular curriculum happened. She was standing at lane 3 with a rifle she had signed out through official channels properly, with documentation, with authorization, and she was running drills. Not for performance, not for documentation, for herself, because she was someone who had spent her entire adult life maintaining her skills, the way she maintained equipment, with regular attention without ego. Understanding that capability is not a permanent condition, but a daily practice. She had been there for 40 minutes when she heard footsteps. Kane. He stopped at the edge of the lane. He looked at her. He looked at the targets. He looked at the monitoring data running on the lane's small side screen. Every shot was in the same cluster, not close together, identical, the kind of grouping that stops being about marksmanship and starts being about something else entirely. Some quality of presence and consistency that goes beyond training into who a person is at the cellular level. He stood there for a moment. You're up early, he said. I'm always up early, she said. She fired another round. Bullseye. She ejected the casing. How did the conversation with Briggs go? Kane was quiet for a second. He took it hard. I expected that, Emily said. Not the way you might think, Kane said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He went very quiet, and then he said, Kane paused. He said he had spent 17 years telling himself that being good at the technical work was enough, that if he kept his head down and hit his marks and followed the program, he was doing his job. Kane paused again. He said he thinks he used the technical excellence as a reason not to look at the other things. Emily lowered the rifle. She turned and looked at Kane. He said that himself, she said. Word for word, Kane said. Emily turned that over for a moment. Of all the people at Fort Raven Briggs had been the one she was least certain about, the one whose capacity for self-examination was most obscured by the thick professional armor he wore. The fact that he had gone to honesty on his own without being managed there, without a general present and documentation being taken, said something she had not fully anticipated. He's going to be okay, she said. I think so too, Kane said. He paused. Eventually, she almost smiled. She turned back to the range. She raised the rifle. She fired. Bullseye. I've been thinking about something, Kane said, since last night. About the shot. The first one, the one in lane 7. Emily waited. You said you fired it because it was time for this place to know who you were, Kane said. I've been sitting with that. He paused. But I don't think that's the whole reason. Emily was still. I think you fired it because you needed to know, Kane said. After 6 weeks of being invisible, after 6 weeks of doing work that nobody acknowledged in a place that had decided you were furniture, I think you needed to feel the thing that only that kind of shot can give you. He paused. The confirmation that you are still exactly who you know yourself to be, regardless of what anyone else decided. The range was very quiet. Emily did not respond immediately. She stood with the rifle, and she looked at the target, and she breathed. That's a very perceptive observation, Commander, she said. Am I wrong, he said, a long pause. No, she said, you're not wrong. Kane nodded. He stood there for another moment. Thank you, he said, for what you're doing, for the recommendation, for choosing, he stopped, for choosing the harder version of this. The one where I have to stay and do the work instead of leaving and being replaced by someone who gets to start clean. Starting clean is overrated, Emily said. The work is in the mess. Anyone can lead a program that doesn't have problems. The skill is in staying in the middle of the problem and making it better. She looked at him. That's what I need to see from you. I know, Kane said. At 0800, the full training class assembled in the main building for what the schedule listed as a curriculum review. They filed in expecting a standard session, restructure briefing, the kind of administrative meeting that punctuates training programs with the mild tedium of paperwork and schedule adjustments. What they found when they sat down was Emily Carter at the front of the room, alone without Kane, without Owens, without Cross or Briggs, or any of the official apparatus that had surrounded the past 3 days. Just her, in her service uniform with her rank with the ribbons that told a story nobody in the room had been cleared to read in full. She looked at the 12 trainees. They looked at her. I want to start over, she said. Not from the beginning of the past 3 days. From the beginning of 6 weeks ago, I want to start from the moment I walked through the gate of this facility, because I don't think you have the full picture of what happened between then and now, and the full picture is the only one that matters. She pulled a chair from the side of the room and set it in the middle of the space. She sat on it. Not behind a desk, not at a podium, in the center at eye level with the trainees in their seats, and she began to talk. She told them about the assignment, about the 3 facilities she had observed in 4 years, about the methodology, the deliberate invisibility, the support role, the 6 weeks of watching a culture operate without the self-consciousness that comes from knowing you're being observed. She told them about the first day in the equipment bay, about the calibration errors she had identified in their targeting computers within 40 minutes of sitting down with the equipment, about the 4-inch accuracy gap that their training sessions had been running with for weeks because nobody had audited the calibration logs. Several of the trainees went very still at that. 4 inches at distance is not a small number. 4 inches at distance can be the difference between a hit and a miss, between a successful operation and a catastrophic one. You were training on instruments that were giving you inaccurate feedback, Emily said. You didn't know it because nobody had looked. Not the equipment staff before me, and there was no equipment staff before me, just a supply rotation that cleared out every 2 months. Not the instructors, not Commander Kane. She paused. I fixed it in the first week. Your groupings since then have been tighter. You probably noticed, but attributed it to your own improvement. She let that sit for a second. It was also your improvement, but it was also the equipment. Marcus Webb had his notebook open. He was not writing, he was just listening with the full body attention of someone who understands that what is being said is more important than any documentation of it. I'm telling you this, Emily said, not to diminish what you've built here. Your technical skills are genuine. What you've achieved in this program is real, and it's hard-earned and it deserves respect. She looked at them one by one. I'm telling you because the lesson I came here to teach is not about shooting. It's about what happens when you stop auditing your assumptions. When you accept the feedback you're getting without checking whether the instrument giving it to you is calibrated correctly. She let the metaphor land. She watched it land in different ways on different faces, some immediate, some slower, some that required a second pass before the connection completed. Vargas got it first. Emily saw the moment it arrived in her face, a slight widening of the eyes, a brief compression of the lips, the expression of someone who has just had a lock turn open. We were the uncalibrated instrument, Vargas said. Not a question, a statement. You were the uncalibrated instrument, Emily confirmed. You were giving the people around you inaccurate readings. You were measuring them against standards that were off by 4 inches by the width of an assumption that had never been audited. She paused. And just like a targeting computer that hasn't been calibrated, you were confident in your readings. The confidence wasn't the problem. The unexamined basis for the confidence was. Marcus Webb wrote something in his notebook. One line, he didn't look up. The question I want you to walk out of here with, Emily said, is not how do I become a better shooter? You know how to do that. The instructors here know how to teach that, and they're good at it. She paused. The question is, what assumptions am I carrying right now that I have not audited? What readings am I giving the people around me that might be 4 inches off from the truth? And what would it cost in a real situation with real stakes if those readings are wrong? The room was very quiet. Then a trainee in the second row, a young man named Specialist Davis, who had been largely silent throughout the events of the past 3 days, not from indifference, but from the particular silence of someone processing deeply, raised his hand. Master Chief, he said, can I ask what's the hardest part of the work you do? The observation work. Emily looked at him. The hardest part, as she said, is maintaining your sense of yourself when the environment is consistently telling you that you don't exist. She paused. 6 weeks of being invisible. 6 weeks of work that nobody acknowledged in a place that had made a decision about who you were before you said a single word. The hardest part is not letting that decision become your decision. She paused again. There are days when you start to wonder if the environment is right. If maybe you should be smaller than you know yourself to be. If maybe the comfortable thing, accepting the category someone put you in, is easier than the truth. She looked at Davis. Those are the days the target matters. Whatever your target is. The thing that reminds you of the full extent of your own capability. You find it, you fire, and the truth doesn't care about the assumption. It lands where it lands. Davis nodded slowly. Several others were nodding too. At 10:30, Kane arrived. He had given Emily the first 2.5 hours deliberately. This had been agreed the night before the shape of the morning worked out between them, with the particular efficiency of 2 people who have come to a mutual understanding and are now operating from it. He stood at the door for a moment. The trainees saw him. Emily saw him. He walked to the front of the room and he stood beside Emily and he looked at his trainees. I've been your instructor for the duration of this program, he said. And before this program, I've been an instructor for 20 years. I've trained 43 people who went on to serve at the highest levels of special operations. He paused. I built something real here. I need you to know I believe that. The technical program is excellent. What happens on that range is genuinely world-class. He paused. And I built something else here that I am going to spend the rest of my career dismantling and rebuilding correctly. He looked at them. The culture that allowed a decorated Tier 1 operator to work in my equipment bay for 6 weeks without a single person asking who she was, I built that culture. By what I paid attention to, by what I rewarded, by what I let pass without comment. He looked at Briggs, who had quietly entered and was standing at the back of the room. All of us built it, but I built the foundation. The room was still. The remediation process starts today, Kane said. Formally, with documentation and oversight and structured review. But before any of that, before the official version of this, I want to say it plainly in this room to the people who were here for all of it. He looked at Emily. I was wrong. I was wrong in the specific incident on the range, And I was wrong in the 20 years of decisions that made that incident feel normal. He looked back at his trainees. And I am choosing to be different, not as a managed response to institutional pressure, as a personal commitment to this program and to the people in it and to the people who will come through it after you. He paused. That's all I have. It was enough. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough because the room full of young soldiers who had grown up in a military culture that treats public admission of wrongdoing as a threat to authority had just watched their commanding officer do exactly that without flinching, without softening, without the bureaucratic distance of official language and formal proceedings, and the effect of it on the room was something that no curriculum could have produced. Briggs at the back made a sound that he quickly controlled. Marcus Webb was writing. Vargas had her eyes on Kane with the expression of someone recalibrating again the category she had placed him in this time, upward in the specific direction of someone who has shown the hardest kind of strength. At 11:15, the session ended. The trainees filed out in the particular way that people leave a room where something significant has happened, slowly talking in low voices, still connected to the atmosphere of the space. Marcus Webb stopped beside Emily as he passed. "The question you asked us to carry," he said. "What assumptions am I carrying that I haven't audited?" He paused. "I've been carrying one for 3 days that I haven't said out loud." Emily looked at him. "Say it." "I've been wondering," Marcus said, "whether any of what changes here in the program and the culture, whether any of it stays. After you leave, after Owens and Cross go back to wherever they came from, whether it goes back to what it was." He paused. "Because I've seen institutions say the right things and then go back." Emily held his gaze. "That's not an assumption," she said. "That's a legitimate strategic concern, and the honest answer is I don't know. What I know is that it will depend on whether the people who are in this room today make the choice every day to be different. Not when it's easy, when it's inconvenient. When the situation doesn't make it obvious, when no one is watching, when it would be simpler to let it slide." She paused. "That's what I'll be watching for, specialist. When I'm in the room and when I'm not." Marcus nodded. He left. Emily stood in the empty room for a moment. She thought about the question he had asked, whether it stays, whether the change is real or whether it is the performance of change, the kind that looks right when observers are present and quietly dissolves when they leave. She thought about the 6 weeks she had spent watching this place operate without self-consciousness. She knew what it looked like when a culture was genuinely itself. And she thought with the careful precision of someone who does not reach for conclusions before the evidence supports them. She thought that what she had seen in the past 4 days had something in it that was not performance. The apologies that cost something. The honesty that arrived without being managed. The notebook that Marcus Webb had been filling for 3 days, not because anyone required it, but because he understood that what was happening deserved to be recorded. Those were not performances. Those were the early movements of something real. At 1300, Emily met with General Owens for the final time before Owens and Cross departed Fort Raven. The meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes. It ran for 55. The core of it was the official record, the finalization of Emily's observation report, the incorporation of the IG team's preliminary findings, the formal structure of the remediation plan for the program going forward. But the core of it was also in the way that conversations between people who have served together in difficult places always contain a second conversation running underneath the official one, something else. "They offered you the senior instructor position," Owen said near the end, "in writing with full authority. You haven't given me a formal answer." Emily looked at her. "I've been thinking about it," Emily said. "That's not an answer." "No," Emily agreed. "It's not." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about what it would mean staying at Fort Raven, staying in the role that she had built through 6 weeks of invisibility, now visible now, official now, with the authority to shape the program that had needed shaping. She thought about what it would mean to leave, to go to the next assignment, to do what she had done here, the long, quiet work of seeing clearly somewhere else for some other program, for some other group of people who needed to be seen before they could see. "There's a version of this," Emily said slowly, "where I stay, where I build the curriculum, where I teach the 12 trainees and the ones after them and the ones after those, what it means to be precise about people, as well as about distance and wind." She paused. "And there's a version where I go, where I take what I learned here and carry it to the next place that needs it, Where the work I do here, Kane's commitment, Briggs's honesty, Marcus Webb's notebooks, where that work takes root and grows without me standing next to it. Owens looked at her. Which version is right, she said. I don't know yet, Emily said. I need a few more days. Owens accepted that. She closed her folder. She stood. Whatever you decide, she said, what you did here will be in the record, permanently. What the program was when you arrived and what it is now. That gap, she paused. That gap is your work, Emily. Emily stood. It's their work too, she said. They did the harder part. Owens looked at her for a moment. You always say that, she said. Because it's always true, Emily said. Owens left. At 1500, Emily walked back to the equipment bay for the last time. The wind sensor she had calibrated was in its mount on the range reading accurately. She checked it from the doorway, not because it needed checking, but because it was hers, the work of her hands, the first thing she had fixed when she arrived, and the last thing she had verified before the world changed. It was perfect. She stood in the doorway of the equipment bay, and she looked at the space that had held her for 6 weeks. The organized shelves, the calibration station, the metal stool that Kane had sat on when he came to apologize, which was back in his corner where it lived. She thought about the text message, they're coming. Be ready. She had been ready before she arrived. She had been ready since the day she understood what this kind of work required, not the courage of a single shot, not the precision of a single calculation, but the sustained daily invisible courage of someone who does the right work without recognition, who maintains their full self inside conditions designed to reduce them, who holds the truth firmly and waits for the moment when the truth is needed. She had been ready for a long time. And this place, Fort Raven, with its broken calibrations and its culture and its 12 trainees and its complicated commander, had been ready for her. Even when it didn't know it, even when it was laughing. At 16 of 45, she walked to the range one final time, lane 7. She stood at the shooting position. She did not have a rifle. She did not need one. She just stood at the place where the shot had been fired and looked out at the distance that stretched to where the target stood. 1,547 meters. She stood there for 3 minutes. At 16:48, she heard footsteps. She did not turn. I thought I might find you here, Marcus Webb said. She turned. I was standing at the edge of the lane, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at her with the expression that had become over the past 4 days, the one she associated most with him, that particular mix of honesty and attention and the willingness to ask the question that other people were thinking but hadn't committed to. I made a decision, Emily said. Marcus waited. I'm staying, she said. 6 months minimum, long enough to see the remediation through its first review. Long enough to build the curriculum components properly. Long enough to know whether what started in the past 4 days is real or whether it needed more time. She paused. And then I'll reassess. Marcus nodded slowly. Can I tell you something? He said. Go ahead. When I first heard you were leaving, when I thought you might take the next assignment instead of staying, I felt something I didn't expect. He paused. I felt like the base was about to lose the one person who actually saw it clearly. And I realized that was wrong thinking, because the whole point is that the seeing has to belong to us, not to you. He paused again. We can't keep borrowing your eyes. Emily looked at him for a long moment. That, she said, is the first thing I'm putting in the curriculum. Marcus almost smiled. He did smile. Then he said, for what it's worth, ma'am, I think you're the best shot I've ever seen. I know, Emily said. He laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine, and the kind that makes the person laughing look younger than they are. But that's not why I'm staying, Emily said. The shot is just a shot. It's physics and practice and preparation. What I'm staying for is the other thing, the harder thing. She looked at the target at the end of lane 7. Changing the way people see each other. That takes longer than one round, and it matters more. Marcus looked at the target too. How long, he said. As long as it takes, Emily said. Same as any precision work. At 1700, Emily sat in her new office, not the equipment bay, not temporary workspace, a proper office in the main building, with her name on the door and the authority that had always been hers, now made visible and official. And she opened her field notebook to a blank page. She wrote at the top, day 1, not day 4, not day 46, day 1. because the observation was over and the work, the real work, the work that would outlast her presence at Fort Raven and the presence of every official who had driven in and driven out was just beginning. She thought about the 12 trainees who would graduate from this program and go out into assignments and operations and moments of pressure where everything they had learned would be tested against reality. She thought about the calibrations they were carrying, the internal instruments by which they measured the people around them. She thought about whether those instruments would be more accurate than they had been a week ago. She believed they would. Not perfectly, not immediately, not without the daily maintenance that all precision instruments require, but more accurate, 4 inches closer to the truth. 4 inches at the distances that mattered was everything. She wrote the first line of the curriculum under day 1. It said the first question a precision operator must be able to answer about any situation is not what is my target, but who is in this room and what do I actually know about them versus what have I decided. She kept writing. Outside on the range, lane 7 stood empty in the late Arizona afternoon. The target at the end of it was still green from the last confirmation the system had never reset it and nobody had thought to. And so it stood there in the distance, visible from the range entrance, a small green flag at the edge of possible. The wind came from the northwest at 14 miles per hour. The distance was exactly what it had always been. And the truth that had traveled it, the truth about who Emily Carter was and what she was capable of and what the people around her had failed to see for 6 weeks, that truth had not gone anywhere. It had found its mark. It had changed everything it touched. And it would keep traveling the way truth does when it is fired with sufficient precision past the target, past the range, past the walls of Fort Raven and the borders of the program and the careers of 12 trainees who would carry the evidence of it in the quality of their attention for the rest of their lives. A woman nobody saw had walked into a place that needed changing and changed it not by force, not by authority, not by the loud announcement of everything she had already earned, but by being fully and without apology exactly who she had always been. And in the end, that was the only shot that ever